Hello everybody. Hello everybody. Can I just tell you how fantastic it is to see you all sat there today. Well done you guys. Thanks very much for coming. This panel is Ghost Investigations today. We have some eminent panelists who will introduce themselves in a moment. And the way it's going to work, pretty much like Gio said, we've got some questions here. We're going to pose the questions to the panelists. They'll do their thing. And if you come up with one of those questions, walk up to the microphone and form an orderly queue. Okay? But don't be afraid to do that. Nobody will point and laugh. Okay? But if you just queue up at the microphone to ask your question, we may not get to you. It's just the way these things work. So don't worry about it if that happens to you. So I'm just going to ask our panel to introduce themselves. So then I'll pose a question to the panel. Then it'll be your turn to ask questions of them, and then we'll move on. And that's great. So can we start with Chris, please?
Hi, lovely to see you all here. I'm Chris French. I'm a professor of psychology at Goldsmiths, University of London, and I'm the head of the Anomalistic Psychology Research Unit, which is essentially the psychology of weird shit. And I also edit the Skeptic magazine. And for my sins, I have taken part in some truly dreadful TV programmes.
Hi, I'm Hayley Stevens. I'm the founding member of the British Anomalistic Research Society, or BARSOC for short. I'm also the founder of the Wiltshire Phenomena Research Team, based in Wiltshire, believe it or not. We've been researching odd stuff since 2005 from a rational perspective. And I'm also the co-host of a little-known podcast called Righteous Indignation.
Hello, everybody. I'm Trystan Swale, and I'm a random loser. I often get people throwing insults at me like that. Attention-seeking twat, I apparently am. So, got it out of the way. I'm Hayley's co-host on Righteous Indignation, and I was a paranormal investigator and General Fortean investigator for about 5 years before I decided to put my interests elsewhere.
Well, thank you very much indeed, panel. Let's give them all a big round of applause. Were you including me in that, or should I have my own? So our first question, and remember you can make all of these questions even more interesting by approaching the microphone and hoping for the best. So the first question is, panel, and can we start with Chris on this occasion, please? Why should skeptics investigate ghosts? Why?
I think for the same reason that they should investigate any controversial claim. I mean, true skepticism for me, and I'd echo Michael Shermer here, it's not about denial, it's not about saying in advance, we know that these things are all bollocks. We want to look at the evidence and then decide they're all no. No, so being serious, it's a question of, there are lots of claims, claims within conventional science that are absolutely mind-blowing and totally counterintuitive. And what skepticism is about saying, well, show me the evidence, convince me. If there really is something in this claim, you convince me with the evidence. That applies just as much to claims relating to ghost hunting as it does to astrology, alternative medicine, the whole works. It's also, from a psychologist's point of view, it's absolutely fascinating to look at these claims because, as we've seen from the various figures, the public opinion surveys, lots of people believe in this stuff and a sizable minority claim to have had personal experience of it. So as a psychologist, there's something really interesting there that needs explaining. That's why I'm interested in it.
Okay, Hayley.
Yeah, what Chris has said is really valid, and also as an amateur investigator since 2005, something that became quite apparent was that people who have paranormal experiences are most of the time generally scared and confused about what they've experienced. And as a skeptical researcher, there's the chance that we can go into the premises where they've had the experience and we can find a logical explanation for what's been witnessed, and we could potentially put their mind at rest and help them to then go on to rationally explain other things they experience. So I think that's also quite important. And also, since we started BARSOC in 2010, it's quite a new thing, it's become more apparent to me. I was aware of it before, but since starting BARSOC, you've noticed the amount of stories in the media, especially in the Sun, about ghosts and UFOs and crop circles and things like this that are reported uncritically, and that's somewhere that skeptics can come in and just offer the alternative explanations. I think people know things like crop circles aren't kind of paranormal. There are people that do believe they are. So it's always important to get the other point of view across as well in those cases.
You say crop circles aren't paranormal, Hayley?
Yeah, pretty much. Yes.
I think when I went into paranormal investigations, I had just begun to enter into skepticism, and I think it should be on your list of 100 things to do before you die, to go on a ghost hunt and just look as a skeptic at the methods that paranormal investigators use, because for my personal journey into skepticism, there were some moments of enlightenment along the way when people were claiming things such as ghosts were interfering with video cameras. Never mind that the video camera was on night shot and it was being focused on a blank wall, which is why it wouldn't focus on anything. But to some people, that's proof of paranormal existence. So go in with it, look at it, be amused, but also take what you can from it in an educational sense as well.
Thanks everybody. Now, I'd like you all please to reward our first questioner for being so brave. If you'd like to step up to the microphone, tell us your name and ask your question, please.
My name is Danny Moles. I was wondering, what's the sort of most difficult thing you've had to rationally explain? Is there anything that you've failed to explain? Couldn't find any explanation
and
for it.
And then quickly return to your seat. Thank you.
Right, well, I mean, most of the kind of ghost investigations that I've taken part in have been as part of TV programmes. And in particular, 2 series of a little-known programme called Haunted Homes. I'm sorry, they pay me. And it's fun to do it, you know. Now, it was an interesting experience for the insight it gave into the kind of psychology of what's going on in these situations, because unlike certain other famous TV series dealing with ghosts, we didn't actually fake stuff on that series, which is why very little ever happened. Which is why we didn't get a 3rd series.
Another story from Chris French's highly successful TV career.
And what happened though, and when things did happen, they were generally happening in people's heads. There was a lot of kind of psyching up that went on. These were people who genuinely believed that they had ghosts in their houses, and our psychic, Mia Dolan, would actually she knew that she was there to build up that fear, build up that expectation, to make them see things. Well, she would say that they really were there, but she was 100% honest. But we didn't fake anything. There was only one occasion ever in one of the programmes that something happened that I don't know what the definitive explanation was. We moved from one room to another. I should hasten to add that they realised very early on that if the miserable old grumpy skeptic was around, then nothing happened. You know, you couldn't build up that atmosphere. You know, the moment they said, "What's that noise?" Oh, I think it's just your central heating cooling down. It didn't work, so they used to stick me outside in the Winnebago for hours on end, trying to stay awake, you know, while I'd watch everything on remote cameras. They'd be inside having all the fun. But on one occasion, I wasn't actually present at the time, but they'd moved from one room to another, all being filmed. You know, once they're in the room, it's all kind of it's night camera, so you can't see what's going on. There was a clatter, and there was a little statuette of a Buddha, which had actually been on the TV in another room at the end of the corridor, had suddenly was there on the floor. Now, I don't know how it got there, but that, believe it or not, is as spooky as it got. I mean, you know, this was no evidence for post-mortem survival. Sorry.
I think we've got an ongoing case at the moment we're still investigating, because believe it or not, even though some ghost groups do just go into a building for one night and then that's it, our investigations go on for months. In fact, we've got something going on for years. We're investigating a bakery shop in a town near where I live, and at the end of their counter they've got this gate. It's like a security gate. You have to lift it up and turn it to be able to go through. It's on like a hinge, so that nobody can come through from the other side. And
you mean the other side?
The other side, literally the other side. It's a spirit portal. No, it's not. It really isn't. But just thought I'd clear that up. And we weren't even investigating at the time. I'd actually just gone into the shop to talk to the owner about things that we were planning to do, things we had done. And I'm stood behind the counter with her, and the gate to the side opens and goes flat against the wall. And the manager ran away. She ran out the shop, me in the shop on my own. We still haven't been able to work out a logical reason for why that would swing open, and we can't get it to do it again. That only happened about 3 months ago, so we're still looking at that. I don't think it was a ghost. I'm sure there's an entirely natural explanation or a mechanical reason that it opened. But that's the spookiest thing that I can think of. Yeah.
Trystan, before you answer, could we instead move on to the next question and ask you that question? Could you talk a little bit about how we investigate ghosts?
How we investigate ghosts? Gosh, that's a big question, because there's no one major answer. Your average paranormal group in the UK, they will go into, well, they'll first of all look for a case. It might be something which is reported to them, or it might be a case of a ghost which was seen about 300 years ago, and then they decide to go and investigate that. And believe me, that's more common than it sounds. Most of them use the methods which they've copied off television programmes, such as Haunted Homes, which you were on with David V, weren't you, from Ghost UK?
David V was in the first programme.
Yeah.
Then it was Mark Webb.
Yeah, that was Mark Webb. Sorry, I get them easily confused. I'm a simple man like that. The methods they use on Haunted Homes, if you've seen it, they are atypical of the methods that most ghost hunters will use. Pieces of electronic equipment which aren't fit for purpose, such as meters which detect electromagnetic fields. They're used because somebody somewhere, and I'm not normally sure who, has come up with the idea that these things will detect ghosts, or that you may hallucinate and you may see a ghost from that. I'm sure you can come on to that in a bit, because you can lead on from there. You probably have the details more at hand than me. Other teams will use spiritual methods as well, so they will hold seances and try to conjure up the spirits. Or you can do what I do by myself sometimes when I'm bored. I get the Ouija board out, and I've had Elvis Presley come through to me. I've had... any of you remember Weeble and Bob on the internet? Yeah? I had Elvis Donkey come through to me, so something with Elvis there. Overall, I would say most of the methods which teams use, and this is going to sound very cynical, I think most of them are actually pretty pointless, to be honest.
No, they are pretty pointless. That's a given.
They're always trying to be nice.
So that's
We made sure we had the most open-minded skeptics.
If we have a case reported to us, if it's WPR or BARSOC, we love the acronyms, we try and replicate what's been reported. Sometimes we won't have to go into the location. It's kind of obvious from the accounts that people give to you. We encourage people that report stuff to keep a diary, a ghost diary. So every time they experience something strange, they write straight away, or as soon as they can, into the diary what they've experienced, when they experienced it, what they were doing, when it was, where they were, the kind of conditions that they experienced it in, were they with anybody else. And we hope that by getting them to do that, we can then see any patterns that kind of emerge that might indicate what's making them witness what they are. And then if we think we need to go into the location and have a further look, and maybe that will help us kind of work out what's going on, then we'll do that. But as Trystan said, there is this keenness in paranormal teams to find spooky looking buildings or buildings that have folklore attached to them, and go in for one night and come to a conclusion there. But it's really not that easy. Well, it is, but not if you want to be thorough. So cases can go on, and it can actually be quite boring. It's nothing like what you see on television if you really want to try and get to the bottom of what's been going on.
Chris, in your answer, could you focus a little more on the academic side of it, how we go about investigating ghosts?
Right. Well, I mean, as I said before, the problem there, Andy, is that, strictly speaking, the stuff that I've done that's involved ghost investigation, generally I don't see as actually being academic, and I don't see it as being science, and I fully concur with what we've heard from Trystan and Hayley there, that there's an attempt to give it a veneer of scientific respectability by having all this kit And I will. I'll mention a couple of things. I'm going to talk this afternoon where I cover an experiment we actually carried out to try and test this idea as to whether possibly weird electromagnetic fields could cause people to hallucinate and have weird experiences, or whether infrasound could do that. So I'll save that for this afternoon. But I mean, in general terms, the notion that you can kind of learn really anything from these little simple EMF meters with a single kind of light bulb on that lights up is absolutely ludicrous. I think it's worth investigating the idea seriously that there might be some kind of a link between strange electromagnetic fields and hallucinatory experiences, but you can't do it that way. There are proper ways you can do it, and there's some kind of suggestive evidence. It's not compelling, it's not convincing. As I'll talk more about that this afternoon. There's also, of course, another couple of bits of kit that you will always find is people will record EVP, the electronic voice phenomenon. I'll say a little bit more about that this afternoon, but the general idea here is that the claim is you can record spirit voices by leaving recording equipment in record mode in supposedly haunted locations. Now, there's loads of websites you can go to, and I'll give you a few examples this afternoon, where you can play these clips of so-called spirit voices. Now, some of them probably almost certainly are genuine human voices of living people that were recorded unintentionally. In other cases, I don't think it's actual speech at all. What we've got is a situation relating to what Bruce was showing us this morning, where you can read into it what you think is there. We carried out an interesting little study recently where we made up some EVP and we played them to people in 2 different haunted locations. And we gave them the backstory as to what the ghosts were supposed to be in each of these 2 different places. And in one place, the ghost was supposed to be a male, and in the other place, it was supposed to be a female. We deliberately messed around with these voices to make them kind of in between. We're not clear whether it was male or female. And guess what? People judged it to be more in line with the context they were in. So it's that kind of bias and influence that can crop up in these situations. Orbs as well. That's another. I'm sure you love orbs as much as I do.
Oh yeah.
These days, orbs have really caught on because you go on a ghost watch, you take a digital camera, and inevitably you'll get these what appear to be orbs of light. And the claim has suddenly come from wherever that this is spirit energy. It's not. It's dust, it's water particles, out of focus, caught in the flash of the camera. That's what the camera manufacturers say. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is you never see an orb. If it was a 3-dimensional object, it would occasionally kind of appear from behind a chair, so you'd only see half of it. That never happens. You always see a full orb.
I will say in fairness, Chris, that there have been a few photos like that, but it's a fleeting effect.
It's a very, very much a minority, isn't it? And again, you know, there's rarely a single blanket explanation that covers the board, but yeah, I take that.
Quite interesting with regards to the EVP. There's a team in Wiltshire who've been going around the same time as the WPR team, and on their website they have an EVP page, and I thought it would be quite interesting to go through their EVPs. And I played one that they said was murmuring voices, and it was actually me in the other room. It was my voice. I thought that was quite cool. So.
Okay, we have a lonely questioner there. Tell us your name and tell us your question and return to your seat.
My name's Aisha, and I'm just wondering that when you do your investigations and inevitably find nothing convincing, how frequent is it, or how common is it for people to change their minds afterwards?
I joined a very, very, very bad paranormal group in Gloucestershire where some people will be off their heads on drugs when they were going on investigations. Not me, I should add. And I did notice that the people who were a bit more sensibly minded, they sort of, probably with a bit of guidance from me, they did take a step back, and there were about 4 people there who started to question their belief because of things that we saw in investigations and were able to rationalise it. But there are some people, for whatever reason, whether they desperately want to believe, or they just cannot let go, some of them, that they will not change their minds. And I've seen instances of people who've been recently bereaved. It's very, very sad, and they will interpret anything as paranormal, and it can be the slightest thing, and there's no chance of getting them to change their mind. And it acts as a crutch. And I used to be very much that with the idea that people like that should be protected from it. But I think maybe I'm more in line with you now, Chris, that I think if it's acting as a crutch for somebody, then maybe it's not a horrendously bad thing after all.
I think it does depend on the specific context. If you've got a situation where someone is actually taking some comfort from believing that their dearly departed is in some way still around, okay, we may all think it's all obvious nonsense, but if they're taking some comfort from it, it would seem cruel to actually take that away. If you've got a situation, however, where people claim that they've got some kind of ghost and there's no emotional attachment to it in that same sense, then try as I know that my role in these TV programs is to be the token skeptic, and the emphasis is very much on token. Any explanations the skeptics come up with are not going to be presented as being definitive explanations. There's no way, that's not going to happen. But also the people whose houses we're in who believe they have a ghost, they don't actually pay any attention to what I say whatsoever. They listen to the psychic. She was the star of the show, and then to a lesser extent the paranormal investigator, because they want it to be a ghost. They don't want somebody taking all this excitement and making this is what's made them the centre of attention. This is why they're on the telly. They don't want somebody taking that away from them by saying, "Oh no, you've got rats in your loft."
A euphemism, of course. Hayley. Hayley.
I think it boils down to the reason people think they have ghosts or something in their home. I think it's important as well that anybody researching paranormal claims doesn't do it with the intention of changing people's minds. If WPR are asked to go into a location where people think they've experienced ghosts, then we'll give our point of view, we'll give our possible causes for what they've witnessed, but we don't ask that they accept those as being fact. If they do, then that's great, and if we can encourage them to start thinking logically about what they've experienced, then that's even better. But it's like you say, it doesn't happen, and you also have to question the ethical impact that going into a location can have on the people there. If they're grieving, then going into a location and investigating the strange things they've witnessed can have a harmful impact on them. So there's a lot of questions that you have to ask as an investigator before you try and get to the bottom of what's been witnessed, I think.
Okay, we'll come back in a moment to the types of investigator that there are. But again, we have an intrepid questioner. I'm going to ask the panel to keep their responses to this particular question very brief, please, so I want to move forward.
I was just wondering how you answer the argument that ghosts aren't part of the material or rational world, therefore you can't investigate them with rational or kind of material methods. In other words, science can't explain everything, therefore you can't ever explain ghosts. How do you deal with that question?
Very briefly, evidence and burden of proof.
Yeah. I think it's not the ghost that I'm investigating, it's the oddities that are witnessed, the incidents that people can't explain and claim are paranormal that we investigate, rather than the idea that a ghost exists. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a typical kind of a cop-out where claims are being made that things are happening in the real physical world that are evidence for a ghost, but the moment, if someone then adopts the attitude of, oh yes, but you can't use the tools of science to investigate that, as far as I'm concerned, that is a cop-out.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, same rule, very quick answers, please. If you go, sir, tell us your name.
Thank you, Peter Bamber. To the professional psychologist, principally, the one thing that seems to be consistent about these reports of ghosts is not the phenomena or the ghosts, but the people. Has there been any psychological profiling of the people who report that they've seen supernatural phenomena, and are there any mental or physical health correlations?
Can I keep that just to Chris on that question?
Okay, yeah. I'll talk about some of the evidence for that again in the talk this afternoon, but in short, all kinds of people can think they've had a paranormal experience for a whole variety of different reasons. But having said that, there is a definite psychological profile that tends to go with belief, and it includes things like the tendency, surprise, surprise, to have a very overactive imagination, to be fantasy prone, to experience dissociative states, to be prone to absorption. These are people who, if you're watching a film or reading a novel, get totally engrossed in it. And there are positive aspects to this. Often they're very creative people. It's not all a bad thing. there are some psychological benefits, and there's a psychological downside. I mean, I do a whole course on this, so I'll send you some papers. But yes is the answer.
I want to thank Chris for trailing his afternoon talk so much, by the way.
Oh, did I mention I'm on this afternoon, Andy? I can't remember.
Once or twice, yeah. We why give answers when you can trail your talk? So, Hayley, I wanted to ask you a question, just start a little discussion about this. One of the things that I found fascinating when Trystan came to visit in Liverpool was to just find out about the whole sort of what type of paranormal researchers there are out there going out doing this stuff. So, Hayley, could you start painting us a picture, please, of how many what describe as sceptical researchers there are, how many believer researchers, that kind of a vignette, please?
I think personally I've experienced more believer-based people who have a belief already in ghosts and an afterlife doing investigations more than skeptics. There are skeptics out there, and there are rational investigators out there. I mean, for example, you have ASAP, which is the Association for Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena, who I think are largely people who are looking into the rational side of ghost phenomena. You do get a few members who aren't, but I think that's going to be the case anyway. But just from personal experience, really, I think more investigators are kind of inspired by what they see on TV, use the more spiritual methods that Trystan mentioned before, and the gadgets and things like that. Though there are rational ones out there, and they're the ones we're looking for BioSoc. We want like the best of the best of the best.
I've met paranormal investigators from all backgrounds: university lecturers, housewives.
That's it, really.
Yeah. There was an investigation team in South Gloucestershire called Ghost Busting Housewives, and I think that pretty much tells you all you need to know there, what they were. Strangely, its founder was a man, which I never quite got to the bottom of. I actually tried to build a profile of the average paranormal investigator based on sort of socio-economic background and a few other things, and I got in touch with over 200 groups, and there were only a handful that would agree to take part, and they were the groups that I would consider to be more rationally minded. So I think it's very tough to actually give a profile of what the average investigator is like.
Did you just say 200 groups?
That's just, one of my friends who's also a researcher, she did a study recently. She just Googled paranormal teams, and she came up to something like 400 websites for paranormal teams in the UK. And she gave up after that because most of them had skeletons and things like that on there, like the gothic kind of pictures that you just don't really associate with people that those who've had strange experiences should really be going to.
There was a really bad team in Wiltshire at one point called Hugs as well. I mean, can you imagine anybody who's in a team like that?
I know, it's terrible.
I mean, one big complicating factor here is, of course, that a lot of these people are doing it...
Sorry.
A lot of these people are doing it for the money. It's extremely lucrative. And there's a huge distinction to be made from people who are doing it as a serious attempt to try to figure out what's behind the phenomenon, whether they're doing it from a kind of believer's perspective or a sceptical perspective, if they're genuinely trying to find out just what it's about. And other teams who are actually organising events whereby they charge people 60, 70, 100 quid for the night, and they tell them they'll train them in how to become ghost hunters and so on. Even some of those people probably are not... there's got to be a conflict of interest there, let's put it that way. There's got to be a very strong temptation to fake a few things just to make sure that those people tell their friends about what the night was like.
Yeah, I've seen it happen. I won't name names or locations.
Go on.
Do it. You're my friends.
I attended an investigation at Woodchester Mansion, which is run by a local group in Gloucestershire that just might have the county in its name. And might have Paranormal Research Group at the end. They had paid guests come along for the privilege of being an investigator, and I was just sort of invited along as, token miserable skeptic to sort of give them some validity. And they had a trigger experiment set up, and what the idea is that you have an object, in this case it was a wooden crucifix, and it had talcum powder around it, and you'd be able to detect any movement on it. And there were these motion detector alarms set up in front of it. And all of a sudden, the alarm started to go off. And I don't think certain people were aware how close to them I was. As I went round the corner and I saw a member of the team, one of the organisers, moving the cross across the paper, and he quickly moved out of the way. And with the very same person, there was a similar experiment done upstairs involving a coin, and the coin miraculously disappeared, only to reappear in that gentleman's pocket later on. I overheard him laughing about it. So.
I mean, this will come as a shock to you, but some people have actually claimed that even on Most Haunted, it's not all real. I know. I was shocked too. Burn him.
We'll get to our question in a moment, but 200 paranormal research groups, 30 skeptics in the pub groups. You do the math. A challenge there, haven't we? Intrepid question. Tell us your name.
Nick Thomas. I'd just like to ask, given the seeming universal nature of belief in the paranormal, psychologically speaking, are we normal?
I think that's an excellent question. We're actually beginning to do some research on the psychology of scepticism. Because, I mean, as we heard from Bruce this morning, there's a very strong case can be made that we're kind of, to some extent at least, predisposed to these kinds of beliefs. And the kind of idea that I think sometimes skeptics have, that belief in the paranormal is some kind of deviation from a rational norm, is almost certainly not true, because the norm is not one of rationality. The norm is one of irrationality. So what is it about certain people that eventually means that they actually, break away from that, or maybe in some cases never felt the need to think in those terms? So it's a really interesting question, but I think the short answer is that in one sense, no, we're the weird ones. Especially me.
My wife already knew that, by the way. Okay, so a classic question now for the panel. In terms of the paranormal research teams, before we move off those, what's the harm in paranormal research teams?
The harm is, I've mentioned already that there's an ethical issue. There was recently a newspaper article in a newspaper in Wigan where a young family, I think she was a single mother and a young daughter, had been witnessing kind of classic, what you would call poltergeist activity in their home. And they got door stopped by a journalist who had heard about this through the letting agent. And the newspaper ran a story on this lady who was experiencing strange stuff, and she was generally scared. And a paranormal team that had been going for 5 weeks in the local area at the time contacted her, and they did an investigation at the home, and they then did an exorcism. And she's now not scared. I've spoken to the lady who made the original claims of what she was experiencing, and I've spoken to her. She's now happy. The harm there, I think, in that particular case is that now, if anything happens again, if something falls off a shelf again, if a cupboard door is found open again, in her mind it's going to be a ghost, because that team went in and they did an exorcism. And also in her discussion with me, she mentioned that she's now which at the time she was the laughing stock of Wigan. Those were her words, not mine. And I think that's really, really sad that came about because this team went into her house, because they did like another article afterwards. There's also, I mean, with the television shows, no offence, like Most Haunted, if a location has been on the Most Haunted show or similar, it's kind of a marketing thing that they can use and to kind of boost trade and interest. And as Chris mentioned, they can like charge people to go and do ghost hunts there. And this has led to kind of fake ghosts being created. If anybody's heard the talk I do at Skeptics in the Pub, you'll know a few of the examples. For those who don't, I've investigated a pub in the past where they were so desperate to have the Wiltshire's Most Haunted tag on their pub that we caught the landlord behind the door in the cellar, and he had been throwing pint glasses across the room to try and make us think that they had a poltergeist. Had it not just been that somebody had turned just to see him, then he probably would have gotten away with it. And there you have a brand new kind of folklore story being made.
If it wasn't for those pesky kids.
If it wasn't for those pesky kids. also there's the ethical side, but there's also the side where nonsense is allowed to reign, and that's not good.
There are lots of examples of harm you go to in paranormal research. I think the one which is worth mentioning most is the human element, really. I investigated a case in Cheltenham which I refer to as the case of the ghostly poo, because that's what it actually involved. And the cause was very human, as you could imagine. There are other things happening as well, like strange vibrations, so we're getting into, like, even I'm digging myself a deeper hole here as well. Boxes moving across floors. And somebody ended up getting so scared of what was happening after a medium had come in and told the owners of this business that you've got a ghost of a man here, I can't remember the exact details, that they actually left their job over it. And I'm aware of a case in Bristol as well where somebody had photographs of orbs and they were desperate to move because of it. It absolutely terrified them. They even appeared on television. I think it was on The Big Questions in regard to the case. And people can be profoundly affected by it, and the last thing that they need very often is a team of paranormal investigators going into the house and telling them that Auntie Nora is the cause of the kettle switching itself off again and again and again. And I did a talk on Wednesday, in all seriousness, where in Cheltenham, where a lady came up to me before and she wanted me to recommend her the name of a good medium because she'd recently lost her mother. And it was probably the most difficult question I'd ever had to answer. And she wanted to know as well, were there any paranormal groups that could help her? So I've signposted her in the direction of somebody who's trained in that respect. But it scares me to think that I know of groups who would have jumped on that case straight away, and they would have wanted to return it with all their equipment and probably told her answers she didn't need.
Okay, thanks very much. One more intrepid question.
Oh no, it's Stephen Rooney.
Hello, Swale.
Irish skeptics in the pub.
Looney.
It is the very one.
Back to your seat. Back to your seat.
Just because I owe you money. As you've kind of said, in a lot of cases when people come to you, or when people have ghost investigations, some of them are genuinely terrified, and it can be quite traumatic. I've heard of people who've had ghosts get into bed with them and put their arms around them and stuff like this. How do you try and convince someone that when they've had such a powerful experience, which they very personal and horrible experience, that just shrug your shoulders and say, well, it's not real, it's just sleep paralysis, it's just whatever. I mean, how do you convince someone of that?
I think the point that I should make is that anybody who just shrugs their shoulders and says it's not real and leaves it at that is doing wrong. I mean, I've had experiences when I was younger, and my family have had experiences that they tell me about that are quite scary. And I've managed to come on and be rational about it now. But I think when you are contacted by someone who's got weird, really, really scary, weird stuff going on, the best thing you can do is to try and help them to be able to think about it rationally, to kind of show them ways in which it may be their minds playing with them or the environment they're in. For example, we've currently got a case in Wiltshire that in all likelihood is sleep paralysis. And it would be so easy for me to go to the guy who's reported it to us, oh, it's sleep paralysis. But I don't think that's a big enough answer. So we're explaining to him what sleep paralysis is, exploring ways in which it might be affecting him. We've given him all different resources about sleep paralysis. That way, they've got the information there. And we, like I said before, we never say, this is the answer. We say, this is what we think it could be. And we let people take from that what they will. And I find as well with the ghost diary idea that we have with WPR, that could be quite comforting for people to be able to share what they're experiencing. And sometimes by getting them to write it down, they can work it out themselves, what they're experiencing. So that's quite a useful tool.
I think with respect to the sleep paralysis thing, I think it's quite important to kind of try and get in there early. Because I think once people have decided, I mean, in some cases it might be they decide that they've got a ghost. In other cases they'll decide that they've been abducted by aliens. But once they've actually taken on that role, then they do tend to want to cling to it and not want a kind of what we would see as a more rational explanation. And so, I mean, certainly there are kind of secondary gains in these situations. Although these people are genuinely terrified, there is also the fact that, you know, they've now been in the local paper, maybe been on TV, become a bit of a celebrity through it. And to have someone who just then kind of explains it away, which is, you know, there's a certain resistance on their part very often to hear those kind of explanations. So you're right, you have to be quite careful and considered and sensitive in terms of trying to and just say, well, yes, maybe it's this. And one thing that people often take comfort from is just finding out that other people have had the same or very similar experiences. Because very often these people think they don't know who to turn to. Yeah. Did anybody hear that voice?
Explain that, skeptics. Okay, let's leave the answer there. Thank you very much indeed for your questions, Stephen. We're getting close-ish to the end of the talk. Thank you for all the questions. We're going to stop that there because I've got a sort of final barrage for the panel. And, you know, somebody may be thinking to yourselves, well, I wouldn't mind getting involved in a bit of that ghost hunting malarkey, or want to take your interest a little bit further. And certainly I was fascinated when I first started listening to these guys talking about it, and especially today. So could each of you, and starting with Trystan, please, just working over to Chris, could you tell us briefly what motivated you to get involved in the first place, and then move quickly on to sort of what do you think is the next sort of evolution of this area for the 200 paranormal groups, or perhaps the small percentage of them that have a dose of scepticism? What's going to happen next? What progress can be made in this field?
Technology is the big key here. I became involved with paranormal investigations through watching Most Haunted, and I thought, yeah. Again, it was another sort of path on my journey to sort of scepticism, and I thought, yeah, let's just take part and go for it. And I moved on from ghosts to chasing after duckmen and big cats and all sorts of things. With regard to ghost hunting specifically, in regards to the evolution of methods which are going to be used, there seems to be a tendency already to catch on to new bits of technology. A ghost box is a big thing in relation to EVP. Actually, Hayley's you're probably better qualified to speak on the ghost box than me.
Yes, I have a ghost box. It's just a pocket radio. I heard all these ghost hunters talking about it, and I was like, oh, I want to see what that's about. And I got it in post, and it was a pocket radio that doesn't focus on the channels.
Yeah, it scans frequencies and it spits the output through an echo chamber effect. And you can have they claim it gives you real-time communication with the other side, and you are having real-time communication, but it's one-way communication for Terry Wogan very often.
We had Led Zeppelin once.
Yeah.
Quite good.
Well, Led Zeppelin just might be appearing in the talk I'm doing this afternoon.
Mr. French is doing a talk this afternoon.
I got involved in paranormal research. I grew up with a family who had all had kind of ghostly experiences and had all these stories to share. And then I progressed on to watching Most Haunted and shows like that. And there was this sense that it was all crap. And there were stories that broke, like that Derek Okora was being possessed by people that didn't exist. The whole Creed Kafer incident, for those of you that haven't seen it, look it up on YouTube. And that put the kind of seed of doubt in my mind, and I was like, right, I have to get out there and start answering these questions myself. And it kind of progressed from there. And like Trystan, it's now ghost cases, UFO sightings, big cat sightings, and we had a report of an orangutan. It's like, yeah, I can really investigate that. As for where
you could do.
I could, I won't. But as for where ghost research is going, as Trystan said, with the technology being used, there's also now this new kind of idea that you can communicate with a torch, with a ghost through your torch, not a torch, but a ghost. And you unscrew the battery connection in your torch, and then you put it down on the floor or on the table. Then you ask questions, and the torch will randomly come on and then flash back off. And that's the answer. That's the ghost speaking to you.
Torch divination.
I don't know if you remember the question, but it was about progress.
Yeah, I know.
Ghost progress. Oh my God.
I think the progress will come through just trying to make people think rationally. But again, you can't force them to. we can, but it doesn't work very well.
Well, obviously the future's bright. The future's orangutan. I think
exactly. That's exactly what his talk's like as well. Last word goes to you.
Okay. I don't think. I think we've already kind of sensed this. It's not going to happen that suddenly all these amateur ghost investigation groups are going to disappear. And again, I mean, I do make a distinction between the ones who are trying to do the best, doing it seriously and trying to take a scientific approach, and those who are doing the more sensationalist approach. The latter will carry on, because for a lot of people, they actually just want to believe in ghosts, and they don't really care if actually part of them knows it's a load of nonsense. They're doing it for a giggle, they're doing it for entertainment, it's a hen night, whatever, and that's always going to carry on. In terms of trying to understand it from a more scientific point of view, I think we need field investigation, certainly, but we also need more kind of lab-based stuff where we can actually try and properly investigate factors that might affect eyewitness testimony, that might lead to people having weird experiences, that might affect perception, hallucinations, and so on. And that's happening. That research is going on, and I think we've got we're getting there towards a pretty good understanding of the kind of factors that are important. We'll never get to a stage where we can say ghosts don't exist. It's one of those kinds of negatives that you can't disprove in that sense logically. But if we get to a point where we've offered very plausible explanations for most of the cases, I think most people say, on the balance of evidence, ghosts probably don't exist.
Thanks very much, Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you in no particular order Trystan Swale, Hayley Stevens, Chris French, Andy Wilson.